Welcome to another edition of The Learning Journey, and today we are heading off overseas to talk to one of our staff, or is she one of our staff, in what was formerly known as East Timor. Ruth Hitchins joins us on the podcast, The Learning Journey. Hey Ruth, how are you?
I'm well, thanks Wayne. Good morning.
That's good. Now, a lot of people may very well know East Timor, but that's not its official name where you're currently based, is it? So tell us a bit about the program that you're in.
So Timor Leste is the local name.
Yep.
It's actually meant to be the international name. And MAF has been working there for the last 16 years.
Yeah.
In Dili, which is the capital city.
Now, I'm fascinated by your story because your, I guess, first step towards the MAF journey actually began like more than 30 years ago with your husband Nick. So we're not going to navigate through the whole 30 years because we probably can't fit that in the next 20 minutes, but kind of take us back to like where the seed, I guess, started, because you know sometimes in the kingdom of God there's a seed and it takes a while, you know, for that to germinate and for that to grow. So take us back to the time when sort of aviation became a thing in Nick's life, and then obviously later as you guys got married, a thing in your life.
It was actually only about 4 or 5 years ago. We were on vacation with his family, and we both were in very stressful jobs, and I said to him, what would you do other than what the businesses we're currently running, what would you do if you could? Just if you could wish for anything. He said I'd actually finished my PPL. His flight instructor at the time he couldn't sit his finals because she had left to join MAF 25 years ago now. So that was an unfinished dream which he had allowed to die. I mean, I believe it was latent, and I guess you kind of know those kinds of things in each other. And he said I'd fly, and I was like, well, why not? It's been our journey together, and it's been a bit of a roller coaster, but actually it has the sensation of a train that was already going, that God had going, and that we just had to jump on.
Yes. Yeah.
With no human engineering to make this whole dream actually come true.
So along that journey, so not once you went to Timor Leste, we'll get to that in a minute, but along the journey, kind of like, what did you learn about yourself and you guys as a couple and maybe even as parents? Like, kind of what did you learn along that journey? That
He is a God who never fails to make dreams which seem dead, which have been offered up willingly or maybe unwillingly, to come true in His timing. That you're never too old for a crazy adventure. Our journey's been a bit topsy-turvy. We've got teenage sons. In terms of the learning, just being open to possibilities even when you can't see an adventure around the corner, but just that, I guess you could call it a growth mindset, but just an openness and an availability is actually all that God needs.
Yeah, absolutely. So how did the journey into MAF, how did that come about?
The start of August 2019, just after we'd come back from a break, he thought he would try and get his pilot's medical again. It had been denied him because of asthma and because of laser eye surgery. In New Zealand the regulations are quite tough. So that was the first fleece, you could say, that we put out before the Lord, and miraculously he got it. The board of directors who we'd been working with in the family, in the business, actually said, you're free, we would love you to stay, we love what you've been doing, but we release you. And that hadn't actually been a possibility before, and we were in the middle of some rather big projects, so we didn't see that as actually being a possibility. So it was a whole bunch of impossibilities due to family and church and commitments in New Zealand that very surprisingly just opened up. It was honestly a whole bunch of seemingly, to our way of seeing, closed doors which just opened of God's own accord.
Yeah.
So that was August 2019. And then in January 2020, just before the whole COVID, the world was affected by COVID, we moved to Mariba as a family, not knowing anything, feeling very much like this whole Abraham journey which just goes on through our whole lives. Uprooted the boys. It was quite a big uprooting for them, but we had involved them in the journey because they were older and they had the capacity to be able to, they needed to either not to buy in or to not buy into the stream, and we asked them to pray for wisdom and for insight and discernment in terms of how God was leading them. So we knew this was a whole family decision, but we had no idea. I mean, at the time there were no pilot openings. Nick was able to finish off his flight training, his light sports aircraft hours, which he had accrued in New Zealand, which didn't go towards a CPL in New Zealand, amazingly, went towards a CPL here in Australia, where we are just temporarily. And and it just kind of went from there. But even we were on orientation just over 2 years ago now, and everyone went around the breakout room online and said, "Oh, where are you going? Which program are you going to?" And we said, "We don't know." No idea. And then the next day HR rang up and said, "There's an opening in Timor Leste," and we were like, "It just sounds amazing."
Yeah.
So we haven't really known. It's been very much having to trust God's leading in ourselves, with not an awful lot of external validation or clinical justification. We haven't been able to prove what we've sensed.
Yes.
And we've just had to have, and I guess that's how we've learnt to be able to trust God's quiet leading over quite a few decades now in other areas, which has actually been the biggest skill that we have depended upon in order to be able to make this huge leap.
So the good folks at HR give you a call. So I'm part of that department. So, we'll give them a wrap on the podcast. But so you make the call and say, how do you feel about going to Timor Leste? What's the conversations then in your family? Like, did you know where it was? Did you know anything about the program? Like, are the boys like, "Where's that, Mum? We've never heard of it." Like, kind of take us into the household.
So in terms of our family, we were all in. We did know where it was, but the only media attention that really was back in the war for the fighting for independence. So Nick's mum, I'm sure she won't mind me saying if she hears this, that she was like, "Is it going to be safe? Doesn't everyone have guns there still?" And they do, and machetes and everything else. But because of course it hasn't been on the media for so long, really, and we thought it was really close, because back when I was a teenager and the war was happening, we saw pictures and thought, "Oh, it's just off the top of Australia." It's about a good 6,000 kilometres from New Zealand, and it's a good 700 plus kilometres northwest of Darwin. But I think because culturally it's a really interesting cultural fusion, linguistic fusion that sits between bridging the Asia Pacific region. So we did know a bit about that, and the challenge of learning a new language and exploring a culture which was just so close to Australia and New Zealand, yet so alien in so many ways, has been. We couldn't believe it. We were just so delighted and flabbergasted that actually this whole faith, this little seed that had been germinating in us, that we had no idea what it was going to look like, and didn't need to know, had reached the point where we could let the needing to know actually just be God's business. And if we were embarking on a wild goose chase, then okay, that's fine. Well, we had to be okay with that before we could actually fully leap into this amazing opening.
Yeah. So you've been there a couple of years now. You've learned a lot in 2 years. You've learnt language. You're learning culture, and I think that's going to be a lifelong thing, however long you're there. But sort of as you reflect upon the first couple of years, like, what are the main things that you look at and you celebrate? Things that when you landed in Timor Leste, you had no idea about, and now you feel like, yeah, that's part of me.
It's our neighbours. It's the fact that our plumbing just went kaput when we moved into our home, and it seemed a bit too much to deal with at the time, because my plumbing and my technical teton it was very juvenile, or beyond, less than juvenile.
So just explain that teton is the language there.
Teton is a language,
for those that aren't
that's
familiar.
right. Yeah. So in terms of what makes me feel like, it's just amazing, it's such a privilege to belong, is the fact that through this plumbing debacle, which went on for weeks and months, and was never properly fixed, but the neighbourhood badai, which means the kind of jack of all trades, trying to be a plumber but not actually knowing anything about cause and effect and what can go to where, they brought all their family around to try and just basically camp out at my place, and they brought their teenage sons to try and attempt to translate, and that was the bridge for my boys and us to be actually part of the community.
Yeah. Now, I think for parents, one of the things that they often wrestle with if they're thinking of moving to a new location, and that doesn't need to be overseas, that could be from one town in Australia to another, is they worry about their kids, they worry about how their kids are going to acclimatise to the new location, even though kids are sponges, and they absorb stuff really, really quickly. But what have you seen in your boys across the couple of years that you've been in Timor Leste? Like, what have been the positives for them?
To feel like they belong no matter what the colour of their skin is. They have had to struggle with being laughed at when they're teenagers, so it's pretty hard to feel like, number one, you're conspicuous and you've got girls wanting to marry you, Number two, you're laughed at when you try the language, and to not take that personally, that's like hard for anyone, no matter how old you are, but teenagers, it's been tough. But for them to be able to learn, to adopt a different lens and a different perspective and a way of interpreting has been a challenge, and also, I would say now, a joy.
Yeah.
And when they're playing soccer in my back garden, and it's been the udan bort, which means the big rains, and it's turned into a huge big mud bath, and as my Timorese sons, I call them my Timorese sons because they call me mum, and they say to me, "Oh look, we've all got chocolate skin, mum," and it's just the best thing ever. Like, we're all the same.
Yeah.
So for my boys to be able to they've had to live it to be able to really know it.
Yeah. Do you feel like for your family, and maybe particularly your boys, that you've learnt things in Timor Leste that you just couldn't get from a book or from e-learning or from YouTube or another source, where you can actually learn?
Absolutely. And it's those lessons in resilience, and how to deal with feeling different, even if other people don't see you as different, how to deal with stress, with conflict cross-culturally, how to deal with being perceived as the rich Malai is the word for foreigner, how to feel when you're embarrassed when your family's freight container arrives and all your local mates want to come and help unload, and you're feeling like, I'm going to lose their hard-won friendship because they're going to see my computer for school come in, or they're going to see the family's bread maker be unloaded, and of course they have to walk into the house to deliver everything, and they're like, all these boxes. To feel like, for them to have to cope with that, and then to see that actually in the eyes of their friends, they're not seen as being different at all. And the hierarchies that we think as rich Malai going to another country where they seem to outwardly have less, actually don't make any difference in the eyes. I don't know if that's, hopefully that's universal. It's definitely the case in Timor Leste. Their very first impression when we had 2 weeks in quarantine, which was rather tough, being stuck inside for that time with the boys, and they looked over the little tiny balcony and they said, "Oh, they're all so happy, Mum. They've got nothing, but they're so happy." And for teenage boys, and if I had girls, to be able to see that it's nothing to do with what you have, that you can be happier and more free and more able to embrace life, and to see the richness that is nothing to do with that whole. And we don't probably realise quite the extent, even though we've tried to raise boys in a Western context who didn't kind of succumb too much to that entitled sense of entitlement.
So let's talk about you, Ruth, because your family moved to Timor Leste and your husband had a role, but you went there as a spouse, so you didn't actually have an official sort of role within MAF. Given your professional background as a speech pathologist, can't even get the word out, maybe I need your assistance, as a speech pathologist, like, how did that feel for you, like going there and going, well, I don't really know what my purpose is beyond, of course, being mum and being a wife?
I had to really cling to something which Nick kept reminding me of, and still keeps reminding me of actually, is that this is about our whole family. Actually, this is not just about me flying, even though I'm quite a big advocate of that and think it's pretty awesome with the dreams coming true thing. But I've had to really trust that God does have my personal best interests at heart, and that of my boys, kind of alluding to what you were saying before about trusting God on behalf of my boys, and whatever the future, whatever that looks like for them in the total new cultural context. So for me, at the stage in life with my boys now being teenagers, I do have the responsibility of supervising them for distance education. However, I do have more scope to be able to actually, I didn't realise quite to what extent, but to reinvent myself. And the openings that I've seen in Timor Leste, and I'm loving working in now in a voluntary capacity, have actually brought all my skills together, seemingly disparate skills from all my years working in other places. I didn't quite see how he could. I knew he could, in theory, but actually in practice, how God could dovetail all those things together. And so I'm now able to work in a project we've called Closing the Loop, which is actually working with we have over 300 medevacs a year for our tiny small program. We've just got 2 GA8s, air vans, and I'm following up with a Timorese colleague with our patients in the hospital to see what they need, how we can support them in rehabilitation, what they need in terms of soul care and emotional care and physical normal things like phone credit so they can contact their families in the districts, and just doing that on a one-on-one basis, organising blood bank donations if we can try and get them through Facebook or whatever. So it's very varied, and I think being open to the huge, I guess because Timor Leste is a small program, there's a lot of opportunity without clearly defined roles for want of a better word, non-job holder.
Yes.
And I've really loved that. I didn't quite see that wealth of possibilities coming, but I'm still pretty excited about it.
Yeah. One of the things that I will regularly tell people is that there's no waste in the kingdom. Like, God uses everything, and someone might be, listening today to the learning journey and thinking, well, I've got skill X, Y, and Z. How does that fit into, where my heart or my passion is, when it comes to MAF or another missions organisation. So I wonder if you could kind of just speak to someone who's maybe in that space at the moment, and they're just really wrestling with, well, here's what I know, but I can't see how God can use that. Maybe it sounds overly simplistic, but an availability and an abandonment, which sound all very nice in theory, but if you, any experiences you've had previously in kind of helplessness or powerlessness, or feeling at the end of yourself, and then finding God pulling out skills that you never knew you had. But I think the more we can take our hands off how we want our future to look, or how we want our career development to look, or where we think we'll be in 5 years' time, and I grew up very, very goal focused. I think the more we can take our hands off how we think things are going to be in terms of our expectations for our personal growth or whatever, then actually it just allows God a lot more scope for his growth, and we're on his growth schedule, and as you say, he doesn't waste a single thing. And often it can take time for us to be able to see some of those patterns emerge. In Timor-Leste, there's a beautiful cultural tradition called Tais, T-A-I-S, and it's a weaving together of hand-dyed cotton strands into the most amazing patterns, and it takes a long time. It's done in the dirt, in the dust, in the grime, in the filth, and it's just incredible. And it's just, for me, that's a very powerful symbol for how God takes his time weaving. So how can we pray for you guys? Like, people listening to the podcast, you guys are in Timor-Leste. Well, at the moment you're here in Cairns. We're recording at orientation. What's the best way to pray for families like yours, or other, missionary families, when it comes to them being in program?
Praying for grace and a way of seeing to embrace the little things as of being of incredible value. Praying for energy, because I'm not a tropics person and it's really hot and exhausting. Praying for us to be able to go gently with ourselves and with those who are closest to us, to go gently with our spouses, to be able to embrace, to have the internal capacity to embrace someone else's dream like our spouse's dream, and for that to be able to be mutual, I think is hugely powerful and a huge gift, which often comes through a lot of blood, sweat and tears. I think that's how we grow together as couples and as families. Praying for spiritual safety, because this is actually very deep and very long-lasting kingdom work that the devil is certainly not very keen on, and he will try to exploit or meddle with or try to derail. I don't believe he actually can completely derail it, but I think he will do his absolute darndest to try to compromise those areas of us growing into the image of Christ to the best of his ability.
Yeah. Well, Ruth, it's been fantastic to meet you. It's the first time I met you here at orientation. I loved your story. I'm so glad that we could share it on the podcast today. Final thought for you to consider. Our tagline for the learning journey is "The sky's the limit." So I wonder what that means for you and your family, and maybe even wider than that, the communities in Timor-Leste.
For me, I'm loving learning alongside my Timorese colleagues, and to help. I'm at my phase in life now, I'm able to help them to be able to see that the sky is the limit.
A big thank you to Ruth Hitchins, our guest on the learning journey today. It was great to hear Ruth's experiences in Timor Leste and what she's learnt from her time living in that new country. And we're going to actually continue that theme in the next podcast because we head to Arnhem Land and chat with Ben Brown, an Englishman who has been serving with MAF in the top end of Australia for only a few weeks. And if you haven't already, we'd love you to subscribe to the podcast, and why not head over to Good Practice this week as well. You can check out some of the learning resources available to help you reach your full potential.